She disappeared without a trace.
We haven't heard from her in 4 days.
I don't know what happened to her, really. I don't know.
So you haven't talked to her?
No, sir.
As the investigation heats up, numerous theories about why she's missing emerge.
She could be in jail or picked up by probation.
She was in a love triangle with them.
Could this be a case of a jilted lover?
Maybe we just shouldn't get married then.
Shocking testimony suggests she isn't coming home.
She watched him dragging a trash bin into the woods.
He was like, Dad, I gotta talk to you.
The caller says she is no longer with us.
It's a cautionary tale about holding on instead of letting go.
They're mistaking intensity for love.
It was reaching escalation points.
Look at this guy. Look at who he really is.
It could be the difference between living or dying.
August 10th, 2018. It's Saturday in Lithonia, Georgia, a sleepy country town turned Atlanta suburb.
In Lithonia, it's not a lot of hustle and bustle, but you have Atlanta, maybe 20 minutes away. So it's very appealing for a lot of people who want the small town feel, but they also want the thrill of the big city.
But tonight, a worried grandmother is placing a call to the DeKalb County Police Department.
911, what's the address of the emergency?
I need to make a report. My granddaughter is missing.
19-year-old Taya Schultz was living with her grandmother at the time.
I haven't heard from her in 4 days.
And while that might not seem concerning on its own, her grandmother says she has good reason to be worried.
Taya is also several months pregnant.
Georgia born and bred, Taya Schultz grew up in a loving home with her mother, stepfather, and younger sister.
She was the best thing that had ever happened to me.
I was Taya's stepdad. Although saying it now sounded kind of weird because I've never referred to myself as like stepdad. That was my kid.
Bursting with energy, Taya never seemed to slow down.
I always said Taya's battery kicked on and it never stopped. Her personality was bigger than the room. And Taya lived her life just full steam ahead.
All of which made her a star on her competitive cheer team.
She always talked about cheer. She just loved cheer and just never stopped just pushing and going.
With her huge heart, Taya always put others first.
She was always so nice, and she had a tendency of never giving up on people.
And through her teenage years, Taya never lacked for suitors.
She had plenty of people she was talking to.
Then a young man by the name of Brandon finally stole her heart.
He was a really nice guy. They were cute.
They had very strong feelings for each other. They had this puppy love, new love thing going on.
She was head over heels over him.
But before long, the couple decided to go their separate ways.
She's like, I really thought he was the one, but I don't think he's the one. She just was really ready to move on.
After that, Taya focused on herself.
She had enrolled in school, she was working, and she actually was interested in going into the Navy.
But love has a way of finding you when you least expect it.
Next thing I knew, she was mentioning this guy she really liked.
He was a young man named Aldishan Locklear.
The two quickly began a whirlwind romance.
Aldishan and Taya were very much smitten with each other. They were in love, and it was a beautiful thing.
And so in 2019, when Taya's family moved to Florida, she moved in with her grandmother to stay close to him. Before long, Taya made a surprising announcement.
Taya announced that she was expecting. She was ecstatic. She sent me the sonogram pictures and everything, and it was just beautiful.
More good news soon followed.
Aldishan was actually asking for her hand in marriage.
He moved into Taya's grandmother's home with her so they could search for their own place.
She talked about family a whole lot and creating this unit.
All right, we'll get somebody out there to you as soon as possible, okay?
Okay, thank you so much.
But now, after Taya's grandmother called 911 to report her disappearance, a detective has arrived at her home to conduct an interview.
Do you know who the last person was to see your granddaughter?
My granddaughter's boyfriend, Aldishan.
He said the last time he saw her was Tuesday evening when they were hanging out on the couch at her grandmother's house.
And he said she went to work.
And he hadn't seen her or heard from her since.
Do you know where he is now?
He's out looking for her.
He said, we're gonna go out and look for her. I'm gonna do everything I can to help find her.
In the meantime, Taya's grandmother suggests that the detective talk to Taya's mother, who may have more information.
Taya's mother also has not heard from Taya, and she is extremely concerned.
Since Taya's mother resides in Florida, he reaches her via phone.
Hello, this is Ebony.
Hi, Ebony. This is Detective Stahl with the DeKalb County Police Department. How are you doing today?
Hi, Detective Stein. How are you?
Hey, I'm trying to touch base with you a little bit further in reference to Taya.
Ebony informs the detective that her last contact with her daughter was Tuesday night.
I received a text message from Taya. Her phone was broken, so this was from Aldishan's phone.
But it's the content of the message that has her mother concerned the most.
She said, Mom, Aldishan and I, we got into a fight. We've decided we're not gonna be together anymore.
They had a big falling out, and she got up and left out of the house.
That's why I cheated on you.
Though only 19, Taya Schultz was in love and starting a family with her 18-year-old boyfriend, Aldishan Locklear.
She was so excited about the marriage, and she was even more excited about having this baby.
But 4 days ago, Taya left her grandmother's home in Lithonia, Georgia, and never returned.
Nobody had heard Deceit from her, and everybody was worried.
I get this huge knot in my stomach because that doesn't kind of sit right.
When the detective speaks with Taya's mother, she tells them she last heard from her daughter Tuesday night.
Since Taya's phone was broken, she wrote from Aldishan's phone. Apparently, they had an argument and were splitting up.
When asked if Aldishan could have had something to do with her daughter's disappearance, Taya's mother isn't sure.
Taya and Aldishan would get into arguments.
You're crazy,
What? How am I crazy? There was a lot of yelling and conversations, but it seemed like really small, minute things. So it didn't really send up any major things for me.
She also admits this wasn't the first time Taya had disappeared.
She, in the past, yes, she's had moments where she'll kind of go away.
If she got into a disagreement with her boyfriend, she would need space to decompress.
She was known to not contact her family for maybe a day or two.
Typically, in this situation, her mother would just call Taya. But this time it was more complicated since her phone was broken.
Her mother had to get a little more creative.
Does she communicate on Instagram? Like, if you send her a message, does she generally respond back to you?
So I'm not on her page now, but I did ask one of her female friends to send her a message for me.
Taya was often very active on social media, so Taya's mom tried to talk to some of her friends and asked them to reach out to Taya via instant message.
Although the investigator understands Taya's mother's concern, he isn't too worried yet.
An adult is an adult. They can make their own choices. They can do their own thing.
She doesn't have to actually respond or come back if she doesn't want to.
When the detective asks where Taya might have gone to get away, her mother mentions her ex-boyfriend, Brandon, in Atlanta.
Last time she went and hung out with him for a few days.
Taya's relationship with Brandon was pretty much over, but they were still friends.
Possibly, there were strong feelings there that lingered on.
Could this be a case of a jilted lover?
We were together, we broke up, now you're pregnant with another man. You definitely have to take that into consideration.
Okay, thank you.
With so many unknowns, the detective decides to search Taya's room for clues to her whereabouts.
They're looking for anything that she could have written her plans down in. They're also looking for foul play.
There's nothing to indicate a crime occurred or where Taya might be now. But the detective doesn't leave empty-handed.
They do see her cell phone that's broken and a laptop left behind.
These are taken back to the station to be searched for possible evidence.
After that, police place a call to her current boyfriend, Aldeshawn Locklear.
Hey, is Aldeshawn there?
Yeah, this is me.
When they ask him to come in to make a formal statement, he seems eager to help.
Yeah, whatever. Like I told her mom, I said, whatever I can do to help.
But logistics pose a problem.
Aldeshawn doesn't have a car, so he tells police he'll need to ask his father if he can bring him in the next day. He'll call back later to confirm the appointment.
Now that an interview is scheduled with Aldeshawn, police also need to speak to her ex, Brandon.
Hello?
They tell him Taya is missing.
What?
So you haven't talked to her?
He has neither spoken to nor seen Taya in a while. He has no idea where she is.
But given what Taya's mother told them, police can't rule out that he could be lying.
Without knowing where Taya went and not having a clear timeline of exactly when she disappeared, it's too early in the case to tell.
Nonetheless, by now investigators consider Taya officially missing.
They put out a be on the lookout for her.
Already, her friends and family have joined the effort to find her.
Everybody start posting the flyer and everything. If you do see her, please reach out.
Taya was a very loved person. People were going to do whatever it took to find her.
Meanwhile, police return to Taya's neighborhood to canvass for witnesses.
Hey, good morning, ma'am. How you doing? I don't know if you heard or not. We've got a missing person in the area, so we just kind of started canvassing around here.
They come across one neighbor who reports seeing something troubling the morning after Taya vanished.
She informs detectives that she actually watched Aldeshawn from the window of her home dragging a trash bin into the woods behind Taya's grandmother's house.
He went back in that area over there.
When he was wheeling the trash can toward the wood line, he was pulling it kind of hard. It was difficult.
In Lithonia, Georgia, detectives investigating the disappearance of 19-year-old Taya Schultz have just learned that a neighbor witnessed her boyfriend, Aldeshawn Locklear, engaging in suspicious behavior the night she disappeared.
He was bringing a trash bin out into the backyard woods behind Taya's grandmother's house.
He went back in that area over there.
The thing that stuck out was when he was wheeling out toward the woods, he was labored in the way he was pulling, but when he came back, it was not like that. He was pulling it back up very easily.
Although the neighbor admits she almost mentioned this to Taya's grandmother, something she saw the next day changed her mind.
She saw Aldeshawn hugging Taya's grandmother on their front porch, so she thought that everything was fine.
Only now she admits she wasn't the only one in the neighborhood to witness something suspicious that evening.
This is just hearsay. I didn't hear it. But my neighbor said she heard screaming.
I literally can't even fathom, like, considering marrying you anymore.
She witnessed seeing my daughter outside in front of the house with Aldershon.
Follow me and my grandma.
They were arguing and screaming.
She said, I called to see if you had heard screaming, but you were not at home.
But when investigators approach the neighbor in question, she refuses to talk.
The next door neighbor just wanted nothing to do with even speaking to the police.
Police hope a search of the area behind Taya's grandmother's house will be more fruitful.
There was a lot of foliage, a lot of woods backing up to it.
It wasn't an easy area to search, and if Aldershon had deposited something behind the house, police were unable to locate it.
Still disturbed by what the neighbor told them, investigators get Taya's grandmother's permission to do a more in-depth look at the missing teen's room.
They spray the room with luminol to see if there are any traces of blood.
But there was no traces of blood at all.
Back at the station, police look for any signs of Taya in their database.
That's when they uncover something that might explain her disappearance.
Several months before, her and Aldershon had gotten into a violent altercation. When the police came upon them, Aldershon had a bleeding cut on his face, and he said that it was from Taya throwing a glass of lemonade at him. So the police at that time arrested Taya, and she ended up getting sentenced to probation.
Was it possible Taya had gotten picked up on some kind of parole violation?
Maybe on Tuesday, after storming out on Aldershon, she had forgotten to check in with her parole officer.
I thought perhaps she could have been arrested. She could be in jail.
Detectives quickly place a call to Taya's probation officer.
Hey, LT, this is Detective Stahl. I'm working a missing and endangered persons case in reference to a female that is on probation out of Forsyth.
What's your last name?
Choates.
First name?
Tea.
Black female?
Correct. I'm hoping it's as simple as they violated her probation and she's in custody.
When her parole officer checks their database, they do have Taya on record for not showing up for her most recent appointment.
But there's no record of her being in custody.
We have no warrants on her. She is not in our jail.
Okay.
The investigation appears to be at a dead end. But soon, new evidence will jumpstart the case.
There's a young lady that knows Aldershon and Taya personally.
And she's reached out to Taya's mother with some shocking information.
I remember kind of going through my messages. She just said who she was and said, I don't know if Taya shared this with you, but I just want to share with you. And it was literally my daughter telling her that she's beaten and bruised.
She claims that Taya confessed to her all the terrible things Aldershon put her through.
Taya had told her that her life was in danger.
He tried to strangle and suffocate me.
DeKalb County detectives have discovered that 19-year-old Taya Schultz had been abused by her boyfriend, Aldershon Locklear, after an acquaintance reached out to the missing teen's mother.
I thanked her for sharing it so that we could have one more piece of the puzzle.
But detectives need to talk to this acquaintance directly.
Have a seat. So how did you know the couple?
According to this woman, she had been dating Aldershon when she learned he was also dating Taya.
Okay, then maybe we just shouldn't get married then. Don't follow me in my grandma's house.
Apparently, Taya also found out about her at the same time.
But the woman says he and Taya made up, and things between her and Aldershon ended.
He said, I want a family. He chose Taya and the baby.
She claims she accepted it and moved on. But then a couple months later, she received a message from Taya.
She got an instant message from Taya on social media with some pretty disturbing pictures and video.
In videos, she talked about being abused by Aldershon.
He tried to strangle and suffocate me. He tried to kill me because he thought I was gonna leave him.
But even in those moments, she saw a broken little boy that she really wanted to not give up on.
She had also texted her that her life and her babies were in danger.
I feel like Taya reaching out was this case where, since you're familiar with our situation, maybe you could be a shoulder for me to lean on. She was saying, you know, this could have been you if I would have let him go, but I held on tighter and decided to marry him, and look what it's gotten me into.
Aldershon's ex says she texted Taya back to offer help.
She said she could call her if she wanted. She also encouraged Taya to tell someone about the abuse and get away from Aldershon.
How did Taya respond?
She didn't.
Thank you for giving us that information.
When police put Aldershon's name into their database, they find more to back up Taya's claims of abuse.
Apparently, Aldershon had been arrested in May after Taya went to the emergency room with a knot on her head and a swollen, bloodshot eye.
She told police that Aldershon had punched her in the eye after she found him texting with another female.
Looking for more evidence against Aldershon, police circle back with Taya's mother.
She said that she suspected the relationship had become toxic and even abusive.
But it wasn't until recently that she got confirmation.
She says that Taya told her she was hanging out with Aldershon and she went to the bathroom.
She had said, oh, well, Mom, you know, some random people jumped me.
She gave us this very intricate story about somebody trying to steal a purse.
Taya's mother thought it was peculiar, though, because Taya still had her purse, her cell phone, all of her belongings.
I said it to her. Something more is happening, and you're trying to protect this person.
Given everything they've learned, investigators are inclined to agree with Taya's mother's assessment.
Aldershon had more to do with that incident than Taya was letting on.
Though Aldershon is scheduled to come into the station the next day, it has now become a top priority for investigators to speak with him.
We immediately reach out to Aldershon.
Though unable to get in touch with him, they are able to reach his father.
They tell him they are investigating a missing persons case about his son's girlfriend.
You know your son's girlfriend?
Yeah, I met her, yes.
When asked what their relationship was like, he says the couple had mostly been happy.
He was under the impression the relationship was going good.
I didn't do anything. I did not cheat on you.
But he admits that a few weeks ago, things seemed to take a turn for the worse.
Starting 2 weeks ago, probably, he was telling me he was ready to get out of a relationship. And he said he was tired of him and her arguing all the time.
You can't trust me. No, I can't trust you when you're sleeping with other people. It was one person.
When asked if he knows Taya is missing, Aldershon's father says his son told him she'd left.
He called me on Wednesday and was like, Tay left and I don't know what's going on. And I said, okay, so where's she at now? I don't know. She does this every so often where she leaves and then the family don't know where she's at.
His father also explains that Taya's departure had caused other issues for Aldershon.
He said, her grandma's kicking me out right now. You can't stay here. My granddaughter ain't staying here.
So Aldershon moved back in with his father, with the promise to enroll in school.
He moved home Wednesday and was enrolled in school by Friday morning.
So I'm feeling as a proud father. Wow, he's actually trying to get his life together.
Out of concern for Taya, Aldershon's father agrees to come in later that evening with his son.
He couldn't come right away because Aldishan was still in class and wouldn't be out for a few hours.
But not long after police hang up with Aldishan's father, an anonymous tip comes in suggesting this is not just a missing persons case.
The caller claims to be a good friend of Aldishan's father.
He says that Aldishan's father told them that Taya is no longer with us and that Aldishan had something to do with it.
It potentially could be a homicide.
As detectives in Lithonia, Georgia wait for their suspect, Aldishan Locklear, to come into the station with his father for questioning, they get an anonymous phone tip.
The caller says that Taya is dead and Aldishan had something to do with it.
Investigators barely have time to digest this information before Aldishan and his father arrive.
Thanks for coming in.
They are immediately ushered into separate interview rooms.
Come with me right here. It's okay, man.
We wanted to talk to the father before we talked to Aldishan. We knew his father had this information, and we wanted to extract that information from him.
But just as police are sitting down with the father, he gets a phone call.
It's his attorney on the line.
Am I supposed to still keep answering questions or cease all communications? Okay.
When investigators press him about why he's hired a lawyer, Aldishan's father says his son requested one.
Did he tell you something that would be a reasoning you would think you need an attorney?
That's all I'm gonna say.
No sooner has Aldishan's father shut down the interview than a call comes in over dispatch.
When we're doing interviews, we usually carry our radios, and his father heard his address over the radio.
They said they're going to do a search of his house to see if there's any evidence of foul play. Aldishan's father at that moment is shocked.
And that's when he decides to talk.
He's like, I don't need an attorney, I'll tell you everything.
Aldishan's father reveals that after police informed him Taya was missing, he began to fixate on something he'd noticed about his son.
He's got scratches on his arms and stuff. That makes me a little curious.
So when he picked his son up from school earlier that day, Aldishan's father confronted him.
I said, you got scratches on you. Are you sure nothing happened? He told me those scratches came from fishing by a lake by her grandma's house. He said about the sticker bras and stuff.
But Aldishan's father remained skeptical.
I said, don't lie to me, because I got to take you down there today. And no cops, when they see scratches, they're going to be wondering why you got scratches on you.
That's when Aldishan's father says his son grew somber.
He was like, Dad, I got to talk to you. And I was like, what's wrong? And he was like, Dad. And he said, I don't remember what happened. And he said, but they ain't here no more.
So his father asked where Taya is now.
He said, she's at her grandma's house in the woods, behind the barn or something like that.
After that, Aldishan's dad told his son not to tell him anymore.
I said, but if you tell me, I'm gonna have to tell them. I said, let's call the attorney. And it breaks my heart as a father to know that he has done something like this.
But he made the right decision. And he did it not only for his son, but he also did it for Taya. And I'm thankful that he did.
After finishing up with Aldishan's father, investigators move on to the suspect.
Everybody has a story. Today is when I want to hear your story.
Although initially he wanted a lawyer, he decided to go ahead and give them a statement.
But when they ask Aldishan where Taya is, he denies that he knows.
I don't know what happened to her, really. I don't know. We don't know. No.
But investigators know he's lying and don't intend to let him get away with it.
Take your jacket off. And stand up there. Lift your shirt up.
What happened?
Me and Ted got in a fight. Now, you know it's not a coincidence I asked you to take your jacket off and lift your shirt up. You know I already knew that.
Yeah.
That's retesting you. Just prior to you guys getting here, we got a phone call, okay, about your girl and what may or may not have happened to her. Because of that phone call, when you and your dad got here, we started talking to your dad.
And investigators make clear Aldishawn's father has told them a lot.
Why would you tell your dad she's no longer with us? And she's behind some barn, behind Grandmama's house, in the woods. Stop lying, dude. We ain't around. Today is the most important day of your life. And I can tell you, you're not going home.
That's when the floodgates break and Aldishawn begins to confess.
Me and Tia, we had got into a fight, and she was upset. She kept saying she was gonna hurt me because I was trying to leave her.
You're crazy.
I'm crazy.
Yes, you're crazy.
He describes them arguing and Taya storming out of the room.
Taya, I'm sorry.
Only to return with a knife.
Taya, put that down.
No. She kept trying to hurt me and stuff, cut me. I was pushing her off me, and I basically was trying to defend myself.
Right.
After that, Aldishawn says Taya left the room again, but came back seemingly ready to make up.
She said she was about to kiss me,
I'm so sorry.
but she had bit me.
He describes shoving her away, causing her to fall.
He's claiming self-defense.
She hit her head.
Where at?
On the toe.
Nonetheless, he claims at this point Taya was still alert, though clearly she wasn't herself.
I knew something was wrong with her. Like, she started getting dizzy.
Moments later, she lost consciousness.
Taya, you okay? Taya.
And that's when Aldishawn says he panicked.
She wouldn't wake up, so I didn't know what to do. I started trying to do what they do for CPR.
But it soon became clear to Aldishawn that it was already too late.
She started turning different colors. So then that's when I knew she wasn't good. I knew she was gone.
Taya Schote's boyfriend, Aldishawn Locklear, has just admitted to DeKalb County investigators that he killed the missing pregnant teen.
She wouldn't wake up. She just stopped breathing.
But he claims it was in self-defense.
What is wrong with you?
She attacked me in life.
Nonetheless, Aldishawn admits to covering up the crime.
Did you pick her up yourself, or did you put her in something to get her?
I put her in something.
He said he waited for Taya's grandmother to leave, then transferred her body into a trash can.
Then he rolled her into the woods.
You just said you covered up with some branches and stuff?
Yeah.
Did you dig a hole?
No.
But police have good reason to doubt parts of Aldishawn's story.
The marks on his body that he described as knife slash marks looked a lot more like scratches from someone clawing at him.
Their priority now, though, is to get Aldishawn to lead them to Taya.
We decided to bring him back out to the scene. And he walked us straight to her body.
But due to sweltering heat, Taya's body is unrecognizable.
It'd been several days of her being out there in the environment.
Although what remains further calls into question Aldishawn's story.
He said that during their fight, Taya hit her head, but there's no sign of a head injury.
Back in the squad car, investigators confront him with this inconsistency.
She don't have no injury to her head.
Yeah.
You think the inmate's gonna come back she was killed from strangulation?
Yeah, probably so.
Now investigators face the difficult task of informing Taya's family she's been found.
I wound up just catching a flight there, and I remember one of the detectives coming in, and he said, "We found a set of remains." And I'll never forget the air getting sucked out of that room. And I could hear screams and sound around me, but it was as if I was just in this bubble.
Aldershon is charged with Taya's murder, but not with the murder of their unborn child.
While there was a sonogram that indicated she had been expecting, her remains were so decomposed that they were unable to confirm if she was pregnant at the time she died.
Although her family is relieved to see Taya's killer behind bars, they wish she hadn't put up with his abuse alone.
Probably she wanted to kind of shield us from a lot of things that were going on between the two of them.
She never gave up on people, and even when people did her wrong, she always found the good in them.
Maybe she thought that she could help Aldershon become a better man and become less violent over time.
I wish I had the ability to speak with her today. I would warn her that these escalation points would get worse over and over again. At the end of the day, I don't think he cared about her.
Nearly 2 years later, in May of 2022, when Aldershon's trial finally begins, Taya's family is there to face him.
It was hard sitting in the same room with Aldershon, not only for me, but my whole family, having to experience this and having to relive it. I was very angry.
In their opening statements, prosecutors portray Aldershon as a typical perpetrator of domestic violence.
He wanted her for himself. It was a control thing.
It blows. You're crazy. Like,
prosecutors believe that his claim that Taya attacked him was a fabrication.
The autopsy suggested that this was a raged killing that led to strangulation. Not to mention the scratches on his arm and Aldershon's own admission after the body was found.
Prosecutors also play video evidence that incriminates the suspect.
As well as that, he tried to...
They played in court the videos that Taya had sent to Aldershon's ex.
They also showed video recovered from Taya's laptop, revealing that Aldershon was the person responsible for jumping her, not some anonymous girls.
All of which makes the jury's verdict unsurprising.
They find him guilty of felony murder.
When the penalty is handed down, the judge gives Aldershon the harshest sentence under the law.
They sentence him to life in prison.
He'll never be out in the public to harm anybody else again.
While Taya's family is glad to see Aldershon behind bars, it's hard to feel justice has been served.
I was like, okay, yes, he's gonna spend the rest of his life in jail. But the only thing that would satisfy me would have been to have my child.
Nothing would ever take the place of my daughter being here.
But Taya's death will not be in vain. Today, her family runs the Taya Bayani Schultz Foundation in her honor.
We work with these kids and want to see them making the right decisions.
We're teaching these young girls about loving themselves. Just get out there and just be bold, go to school, get that job, run after this career, whatever it is. I wish Taya had seen the hundreds of people that just poured into her services and the messages that came pouring in to me saying, oh, you know, I made this decision because of your daughter. I wish she had seen that.
Miss you, Taya, and love you, and thank you for teaching us all what it is to live life and to live it loud.
The morning of June 7th, 1992, began like countless other Sunday mornings in Springfield, Missouri. The city was waking slowly beneath the early summer sun. its quiet residential streets still carrying the calm rhythm of a community that prided itself on being a safe place to raise families. Graduation season had just filled neighborhoods with celebration. Parents had watched their children receive diplomas. Teenagers had spent the previous evening driving from one graduation party to another, celebrating the end of high school and imagining futures that finally seemed within reach. There was little reason for anyone in Springfield to believe that this particular morning would mark the beginning of one of the most enduring mysteries in American criminal history. Yet before the day was over, 3 women would vanish from a single house without leaving behind a single clear explanation. More than 3 decades later, investigators would still be asking the same questions they asked on that first day. What happened inside that house? Who took them? And how could 3 adults disappear so completely that not one of them has ever been found? The case would eventually become known simply as the Springfield Three, a name that sounds almost clinical. Yet behind those words are 3 individual lives that stopped without warning. Unlike many infamous criminal investigations, this story contains no dramatic chase, no public confession, no forensic breakthrough, and no courtroom verdict. Instead, it is a story defined by silence, the silence of an empty house, the silence left by a telephone message that was accidentally erased before investigators could hear it, the silence of a neighborhood where no one reported hearing screams or seeing a struggle. Most haunting of all is the silence that has lasted for decades as families, investigators, and an entire community have waited for answers that never came. At the center of the mystery stood a modest home located at 1717 East Delmar Street in Springfield, Missouri. There was nothing extraordinary about the property. It was not hidden away on an isolated road. It was not surrounded by dense woods or protected behind locked gates. It was simply another single-story home in a quiet neighborhood where neighbors recognized one another and ordinary routines shaped daily life. The kind of place where children rode bicycles through the streets, where lawns were carefully maintained, and where residents rarely imagined they might become part of a national mystery. In many ways, that ordinary appearance became one of the most unsettling aspects of the entire case. Extraordinary crimes are often associated with unusual locations or obvious warning signs. Here, there were none. The house appeared peaceful both before and after the disappearance. When people first entered that Sunday morning, nothing immediately suggested violence had taken place. There was no overturned furniture, no shattered windows, no bloodstains leading investigators toward an obvious conclusion. Instead, the home looked strangely normal, as though its occupants had stepped away only moments earlier. Yet they had not. They would never be seen again. The timeline surrounding the disappearance is remarkably narrow. Sometime during the night of June 6th and the early morning hours of June 7th, 1992, 3 women vanished together. They were Cheryl Elizabeth Levitt, a 47-year-old hairdresser, her 19-year-old daughter, Suzanne Susie Streeter, who had just graduated from high school, and Susie's 18-year-old friend, Stacy Kathleen McCall, who had celebrated the same milestone only hours before. By every available account, the previous day had been one of celebration rather than fear. Graduation ceremonies had marked the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. Friends gathered for parties. Families celebrated accomplishments. Nothing in the known timeline suggested that the 3 women anticipated danger waiting just beyond the next sunrise. Yet by morning, they were gone. What makes this case especially disturbing is not merely that 3 people disappeared together, but the circumstances surrounding their disappearance. Investigators quickly recognized details that seemed almost impossible to reconcile. Both vehicles driven by the young women remained parked outside the house. Personal belongings were still inside. Purses had not been taken. Money remained untouched. Vehicle keys were left behind. Clothing, cosmetics, cigarettes, and other everyday items were exactly where they would be expected to be if their owners intended to return within moments. Even the family's small Yorkshire Terrier, Cinnamon, was still inside the house, alive and unharmed. For experienced investigators, these details carried enormous weight. People who voluntarily leave home, even for a short period, usually take something with them. They lock doors. They carry keys. They take identification or money. Yet none of those ordinary patterns appeared here. Instead, it seemed as though life inside the house had been interrupted so suddenly that everything simply stopped. The disappearance raised another troubling question almost immediately. How does one person disappear without attracting attention? Difficult, certainly, but not impossible. How do two people disappear together? Far less common, yet history provides examples. But three adults disappearing simultaneously from a suburban home, without witnesses, without signs of violence, and without leaving behind meaningful physical evidence, presented investigators with an almost unprecedented challenge. Every additional victim complicated the scenario. Three individuals meant three opportunities for someone to resist, to flee, to shout loudly enough for neighbors to hear, or to leave behind evidence of a struggle. Yet investigators found none of those expected indicators. It was as though the event had unfolded with impossible efficiency, leaving almost nothing for detectives to reconstruct. The absence of evidence would become the defining characteristic of the investigation. Crime scene investigators often rely upon physical traces that offenders leave behind without realizing it. Fingerprints, footprints, fibers, blood, broken objects, displaced furniture, or signs of forced entry can all help establish a sequence of events. In this case, however, the house offered remarkably few clues. There was no confirmed forced entry, no obvious signs of confrontation, no clear indication that anyone inside had attempted to fight back. Even before examining suspects or theories, investigators faced a fundamental obstacle. They did not know exactly what crime had occurred. Was it an abduction? Was it connected to someone known by one of the women? Had one person been targeted while the others became unintended witnesses? Or had all three somehow encountered the same danger at precisely the wrong moment? These questions would guide the investigation for decades, but none would receive a definitive answer. As the years passed, thousands of tips poured into law enforcement agencies. The Springfield Police Department devoted enormous effort to following leads, and the Federal Bureau of Investigation also became involved. More than 5,000 tips would eventually be reviewed. Countless interviews would be conducted. Search teams would examine locations across Missouri. Various theories would emerge, each attempting to explain how such an extraordinary disappearance could occur. Some ideas appeared plausible at first before collapsing under closer examination. Others remained possible but could never be proven. Several individuals attracted investigative attention, yet no evidence established anyone's responsibility beyond reasonable doubt. Time, rather than solving the mystery, seemed only to deepen it. Each passing anniversary reminded investigators of what remained missing, not merely three women, but the evidence needed to explain their fate. Cold cases often fade from public attention as newer tragedies emerge. But the Springfield Three refused to disappear from public memory. The mystery possessed all the elements that continue to captivate investigators and the public alike. Three victims instead of one. A seemingly ordinary neighborhood. An untouched house. Personal belongings abandoned. No confirmed witnesses. No bodies. No prosecution. Every known fact appeared to raise another question instead of providing an answer. Even modern advances in forensic science have not produced the breakthrough many hoped for. The investigation remains officially open, sustained by the possibility that someone, somewhere, still possesses information capable of changing everything. That possibility has kept families searching, detectives reviewing evidence, and communities remembering names that might otherwise have been forgotten. Before examining the investigation itself, however, It is necessary to understand the people whose disappearance transformed an ordinary June weekend into one of the most perplexing unsolved cases in American history. Behind every unanswered question stood three individuals with their own lives, relationships, ambitions, and routines. They were not simply names in a police file or subjects of documentaries and newspaper articles. They were a mother, a daughter, and a lifelong friend whose futures appeared filled with ordinary expectations until one summer night brought those expectations to an abrupt and unexplained end. Understanding who they were, the lives they lived, and the final day they spent together is the first step toward understanding why the mystery of the Springfield Three continues to endure more than 3 decades after they vanished without a trace. Long before the name, the Springfield Three became synonymous with one of America's most enduring unsolved mysteries. The lives of the three women at the center of the case were remarkably ordinary. Their daily routines reflected the quiet rhythm of a Midwestern community where neighbors often knew one another. Local businesses depended on familiar faces, and major life events were shared across families and friends. There was nothing in the available facts surrounding their lives to suggest that they would one day become the subjects of one of the country's most perplexing missing person investigations. Understanding who they were is essential because behind every headline, every investigative theory, and every unanswered question were three individuals whose lives had been moving toward entirely ordinary futures until those futures were suddenly interrupted. In the summer of 1992, Springfield, Missouri, was home to approximately 140,000 people. It was the third largest city in the state, yet it retained the atmosphere of a close-knit community rather than a sprawling metropolitan center. Residential neighborhoods were generally considered safe, and violent crime was not viewed as an unavoidable part of everyday life. Many residents felt comfortable leaving doors unlocked, especially during the day, and home surveillance systems were virtually non-existent. Modern technologies that are now considered routine, including residential security cameras, smartphone location tracking, and digital communication records, simply did not exist. When investigators later attempted to reconstruct the final hours before the disappearance, they faced the enormous challenge of relying almost entirely on witness recollections and physical evidence, rather than electronic records. This technological limitation would become one of the many obstacles that complicated the investigation from the very beginning. The house at 1717 East Delmar Street reflected the quiet character of the surrounding neighborhood. It was a modest single-story residence situated along a peaceful residential street. Nothing about the home suggested danger. It was neither isolated nor hidden from public view. Neighbors lived nearby. Ordinary traffic passed through the area, and the neighborhood projected the kind of stability that often leads people to lower their guard. Years later, investigators would repeatedly return to the same troubling realization. Whatever happened inside or around that house occurred in a location where few people would have expected such a crime to unfold. Living inside the house was 47-year-old Cheryl Elizabeth Levitt. Friends and acquaintances described her as hardworking and devoted to her family. She earned her living as a hairdresser, a profession built on regular interaction with clients and the trust of the local community. Working as a hairstylist meant more than simply providing a service. It often involved building lasting relationships with customers who returned again and again over the years. According to those who knew her, Cheryl was approachable, sociable, and committed to her work. She had experienced significant changes in her personal life, having been divorced twice, but she continued building a stable home for herself and her daughter. There is nothing in the available evidence suggesting that she had any connection to organized crime or ongoing criminal activity. Investigators found no indication that she lived a secret life or maintained associations that immediately explained her disappearance. Instead, she appeared to be an ordinary working woman focused on supporting herself and caring for her family. Her relationship with her daughter, Suzanne Susie Streeter, was an important part of that life. At 19 years old, Susie stood at the threshold of adulthood. Like many teenagers finishing high school, she was entering a period filled with anticipation and uncertainty. Graduation represented both an ending and a beginning. Childhood routines were giving way to adult responsibilities, and plans for the future were beginning to take shape. Friends described Susie as outgoing and social. She enjoyed spending time with her peers and had built a wide circle of friendships during her years. At Kickapoo High School, according to the available information, she planned to move out after the summer, a common milestone for young adults beginning to establish their independence. Investigators later acknowledged that Susie had associated with some individuals who possessed minor criminal records. However, there has never been confirmed evidence establishing that she herself participated in criminal activity or that those acquaintances directly connected to her disappearance. This distinction remains important. While investigators considered various possibilities during the course of the case, no verified evidence has demonstrated that these social connections explain what happened that June night. The third member of the group was Stacy Kathleen McCall, 18 years old and one of Susie's closest friends. Stacy had also celebrated her graduation only hours before the disappearance. Family members described her as responsible, respectful, and deeply connected to her parents. According to those closest to her, Stacy rarely stayed away from home without informing her family of her plans. She had no known history of criminal involvement or behavior that attracted police attention. Her disappearance therefore presented investigators with an especially difficult question. Unlike some missing person cases where victims are known to have ongoing conflicts, unstable circumstances, or intentions to leave voluntarily, nothing in Stacy's background suggested that she intended to disappear. Friends remembered her as someone excited about the opportunities that lay ahead after graduation, making the events of June 7th all the more difficult to comprehend. On June 6, 1992, both Susie and Stacy participated in their high school graduation ceremony, marking an important milestone in their lives. Graduation day is often remembered as one of celebration, reflection, and optimism. And by all available accounts, that was true for both young women. Throughout the day and into the evening, they attended graduation celebrations with friends. Like many recent graduates, they moved from one gathering to another, enjoying the excitement that accompanies the end of high school. Importantly, the available investigative record contains no indication that either young woman appeared frightened, distressed, or concerned that someone was following them. Friends later recalled nothing unusual about their behavior. There were no reports of arguments, threats, or suspicious encounters that stood out during the celebrations. As far as anyone could tell, June 6th unfolded as an ordinary day filled with ordinary joy. As the evening progressed into the early hours of June 7th, Susie and Stacy made plans to spend the night at the home of their friend Janelle Kirby. Such arrangements were common after graduation parties, allowing friends to remain together rather than driving long distances home late at night. However, when they arrived, they discovered that too many people had already gathered there. The house had become overcrowded with graduates and friends celebrating the occasion. Faced with limited space, the two young women decided to change their plans. Rather than remain there, they agreed to drive to Susie's home on East Delmar Street, where Cheryl was already staying. This seemingly simple decision would become one of the most significant moments in the timeline of the case. Had there been more room at Janelle's house, events might have unfolded differently. Yet history often turns upon ordinary choices made without any awareness of their future consequences. Around 2:15 in the morning, Susie and Stacy drove toward the East Delmar residence. Investigators later determined that this was the final confirmed point in the timeline during which the young women were known to be alive. Some neighbors later suggested they may have seen vehicles arriving in the area around that time, but there was no witness who definitively observed the women entering the house. Nevertheless, investigators concluded that they had reached the residence, as both of their vehicles would later be found parked outside exactly where they were expected to be. From that point forward, certainty disappears. Everything after approximately 2:15 a.m. becomes an exercise in reconstruction based upon physical evidence, investigative reasoning, and the absence of expected events rather than direct observation. Detectives believe that Cheryl had already gone to bed before Susie and Stacy arrived home. Evidence later suggested that her bed had been used, supporting the conclusion that she had been asleep at some point during the night. It is believed that Susie and Stacy returned quietly after their evening celebrations, intending to spend the remainder of the night at home. There is no evidence that any of the three women planned another outing before morning. Their vehicles remained outside. Their belongings stayed inside. Nothing suggested preparations for another trip. In many respects, the evening appeared to have reached its ordinary conclusion. A mother rested after a normal day. Two recent graduates returned home after celebrating one of life's biggest milestones. Tomorrow promised another summer day filled with plans, friendships, and new beginnings. Instead, sometime before sunrise, something happened inside or around that quiet home that permanently altered the lives of everyone connected to it. No one has ever been able to establish precisely when events changed, who initiated them, or how three women vanished together without leaving behind a clear explanation. The final confirmed hours of their lives remain striking not because they were extraordinary, but because they were so completely ordinary. That ordinary nature is precisely what has made the mystery endure. There were no obvious warnings, no unmistakable signs of danger, and no clear indication that the celebration of graduation would become the final chapter in the known lives of Cheryl Levitt, Suzanne Streeter, and Stacy McCall. The next morning, what should have been nothing more than the start of a summer outing with friends would instead become the beginning of one of the most exhaustive missing person investigations in American history. When the sun rose over Springfield on the morning of June 7, 1992, there was no outward indication that anything extraordinary had happened during the night. The quiet residential streets surrounding 1717 East Delmar Street appeared exactly as they had the day before. Neighbors went about their routines, the calm atmosphere of a Sunday morning settling over the neighborhood. Inside one modest home, however, an absence was waiting to be discovered, an absence so unusual that it would eventually puzzle detectives, forensic investigators, and criminal profilers for decades. What makes this morning especially significant is not what people found, but what they did not find. There were no cries for help, no reports of violence, no obvious signs of forced entry. Instead, there was a house that looked strangely normal, almost frozen in time, while its three occupants had vanished completely. Earlier plans had already been made. Suzanne Susie Streeter and Stacy McCall intended to spend part of the day with friends at Whitewater, a popular local water park. It was meant to be another enjoyable day following the excitement of graduation. Their friend Janelle Kirby, accompanied by her boyfriend Mike Henson, drove to the East Delmar residence sometime between approximately 8:00 and 9:00 that morning to pick them up. Nothing about the drive suggested they were heading toward the beginning of a major criminal investigation. They expected two recent graduates to answer the door, perhaps still tired after a long night of celebrations. Instead, from the moment they arrived, small details began to create a quiet sense that something was not quite right. The first observation appeared harmless enough. Both vehicles driven by Susie and Stacy were still parked outside the house. At first glance, this seemed perfectly reasonable. Since the two young women had returned during the early hours of the morning, their cars would naturally remain where they had parked them. Rather than signaling danger, the vehicles initially reassured Janelle that her friends were probably still asleep. There was every reason to believe they would soon answer the door. Yet as the minutes passed, that ordinary assumption began to dissolve. The front door was unlocked. Again, this alone was not necessarily alarming. In Springfield during the early 1990s, many residents felt comfortable leaving doors unlocked, especially during daylight hours. Nevertheless, calling out into the house produced no response. There were no footsteps approaching from a bedroom, no familiar voice answering from another room. No indication that anyone inside had heard their arrival. Curious rather than frightened, Janelle and Mike entered the residence. What they encountered was not chaos. In fact, the striking feature of the house was its remarkable order. Everything appeared almost exactly as one would expect to find inside an ordinary family home on a Sunday morning. Furniture remained neatly arranged. Nothing appeared overturned. There were no broken tables, scattered belongings, or obvious evidence of a struggle. If violence had occurred there only hours earlier, it had left almost no visible trace. This apparent normality would later become one of the defining mysteries of the entire investigation. One of the first living creatures to greet them was the family's small Yorkshire Terrier named Cinnamon. The dog was inside the home, alive, healthy, and apparently unharmed. Cinnamon's presence carried unexpected significance. Pets often provide investigators with subtle clues regarding the sequence of events inside a residence. In this case, the dog's presence suggested that whoever had left the house had not taken the family pet along. Had the women voluntarily planned to leave for an extended period, abandoning Cinnamon without arrangements for care would have been highly unusual. The little dog wandered through the home as though waiting for its owners to return, unaware that the familiar routine had already been shattered. As Janelle and Mike continued looking through the residence, they noticed additional details that deepened the mystery. The television was not on. The air conditioning remained operating, quietly cooling the home despite the growing warmth outside. The bedrooms appeared undisturbed. Investigators would later determine that Cheryl Levitt's bed showed signs of having been slept in, supporting the conclusion that she had gone to bed sometime before her daughter and Stacy returned home during the night. Nothing suggested that anyone had hurriedly packed belongings or prepared for an unexpected trip. Instead, the house conveyed the impression that the previous evening had ended in the most ordinary way imaginable. Then came the details that investigators would later view as some of the strongest evidence that the three women had not left voluntarily. The purses belonging to Cheryl, Susie, and Stacy remained inside the house. Their contents had not been emptied. Money was still present. Identification cards remained where they normally would have been. In addition to the purses, vehicle keys had also been left behind. Outside, both automobiles remained parked exactly where they had been left after the young women returned home around 2:15 a.m. For detectives, this combination of facts was difficult to ignore. People who intentionally leave home almost always take the basic items necessary for everyday life. They carry wallets or purses, identification, keys, and transportation. Yet here, every one of those essentials remained behind. Clothing and cosmetics also remained untouched. Cheryl's cigarettes and smoking materials were still inside the home. Investigators would later note that if she had chosen to leave voluntarily, especially for more than a brief period, leaving behind her cigarettes would have been unusual. Each object by itself might have seemed insignificant. Together, they formed a consistent pattern pointing toward one conclusion. Whatever caused the three women to leave, it likely happened unexpectedly and without giving them the opportunity to collect even their most basic personal belongings. Outside the front entrance stood another detail that would later become infamous in discussions of the case. A glass porch light had been shattered. The broken globe lay in pieces near the entrance to the home. At first, Janelle and Mike assumed the damage resulted from an accidental incident unrelated to anything serious. Wanting to help, they cleaned up the broken glass before police were ever notified. Their decision was understandable. At that moment, they believed they were simply visiting friends who had unexpectedly stepped out. They had no reason to imagine they were standing at what might become a major crime scene. Yet that simple act of cleaning would later carry enormous investigative consequences. Once the broken glass had been removed, detectives lost the opportunity to determine whether fingerprints, blood, fibers, or other trace evidence might have been present on the shattered pieces. Even more frustrating Investigators could never establish with certainty whether the light had been broken before, during, or after the disappearance. It remains impossible to know whether the damaged porch light represented a crucial clue or merely an unrelated coincidence. Another potentially significant piece of evidence vanished before investigators ever had the opportunity to examine it. During the morning, the home's answering machine received at least one telephone call. According to individuals who heard the recording before it disappeared, the caller was an unidentified male whose message contained obscene or sexually suggestive content. Those who listened reportedly found the message disturbing enough to remember its general nature. Yet before detectives could hear it themselves, the recording was accidentally erased. No one could later recall the exact wording. No recording survived for voice comparison or forensic analysis. Investigators have long regarded the erased answering machine message as one of the greatest lost opportunities in the case. Had the recording been preserved, modern forensic techniques might have allowed experts to analyze the caller's voice, speech patterns, or other identifying characteristics. Instead, only secondhand descriptions remained, leaving investigators unable to determine whether the caller had any connection whatsoever to the disappearance. As the morning continued, more people arrived at the East Delmar residence. Friends, relatives, and concerned individuals entered the home searching for answers. Some walked from room to room calling the women's names. Others answered incoming telephone calls. People moved objects, opened doors, and traveled repeatedly through the house. From a human perspective, their actions were entirely understandable. They believed they were looking for missing friends and family members. Few imagined that every movement through the house might unknowingly alter evidence that detectives would later desperately need. By the time law enforcement officers finally arrived and recognized the seriousness of the situation, the integrity of the scene had already been significantly compromised. Investigators later estimated that somewhere between 10 and 20 people had entered the residence before it was secured. The consequences were profound. Fingerprints could no longer be confidently associated with a particular time. Footprints became mixed together. Hair, fibers, and countless microscopic traces from visitors became impossible to separate from anything left behind during the disappearance itself. Investigators were forced to confront the painful reality that one of their most valuable sources of evidence had been unintentionally contaminated before the investigation had truly begun. Looking back with modern forensic standards, this loss of evidence represents one of the greatest tragedies of the case. Today, crime scenes are often secured within minutes, and investigators work carefully to preserve every possible trace. In June 1992, however, the people entering the East Delmar home acted not as witnesses at a crime scene, but as worried friends trying to locate loved ones. Their actions reflected compassion rather than carelessness. Yet the investigative consequences would prove irreversible. As detectives began documenting the residence, another striking fact emerged. Despite an extensive examination of the home, they found no blood, no obvious signs of violence, no damaged furniture indicating a struggle, and no evidence of forced entry. It was as though the three women had simply ceased to exist sometime during the night, leaving behind a perfectly ordinary home filled with perfectly ordinary possessions. The combination of abandoned personal belongings, the untouched vehicles, the unharmed family dog, the broken porch light, the erased answering machine message, and the absence of physical evidence transformed what initially appeared to be a routine missing person report into something far more disturbing. Investigators now faced a mystery unlike almost any they had encountered before. Three women had vanished from a quiet suburban home, yet the house itself refused to reveal what had happened within its walls before sunrise on June 7, 1992. As the realization spread that Cheryl Levitt, Suzanne Susie Streeter, and Stacy McCall had not simply stepped out for a short errand, the atmosphere surrounding 1717 East Delmar Street changed dramatically. What had begun as confusion among friends quickly evolved into a full-scale missing person investigation. Every passing hour increased concern. The three women had left behind nearly everything they would have needed if they intended to go anywhere voluntarily. Their vehicles remained parked outside. Their purses, money, identification, and keys were still inside the house. The family dog had been left unattended. No one had heard from any of them. For investigators, these facts suggested that something had interrupted an otherwise ordinary night. But determining exactly what that interruption had been proved extraordinarily difficult. When law enforcement officers began examining the residence, they immediately faced a problem that would shape the investigation for decades. Before the home had been recognized as a potential crime scene, numerous people had already entered the property. Friends had searched the rooms while calling the women's names. Family members had looked for clues that might explain where they had gone. Concerned visitors had answered telephone calls, walked through different areas of the house, and handled objects without realizing their potential evidentiary value. According to later estimates, somewhere between 10 and 20 individuals had entered the residence before officers secured it. From an investigative standpoint, this contamination represented a devastating setback. Every additional person introduced new fingerprints, new shoe impressions, new hair, new fibers, and new opportunities for existing evidence to be altered or destroyed. Detectives could no longer confidently determine whether many of the traces they observed belonged to the missing women, the offender, or innocent visitors. Even seemingly insignificant movements through the home complicated later forensic analysis. Modern criminal investigations place extraordinary emphasis on preserving crime scenes from the earliest possible moment precisely because evidence, once disturbed, can rarely be reconstructed. In this case, investigators were forced to continue despite knowing that one of their greatest sources of information had already been compromised. The broken porch light remained a particularly frustrating example. By the time police learned that the glass globe near the front entrance had shattered, the fragments had already been swept away. Investigators could no longer examine the pieces for fingerprints, biological material, or trace evidence. They could not determine whether the damage occurred before the women disappeared, during the incident itself, or afterward. If the broken light resulted from an encounter involving the offender, an important opportunity to reconstruct the sequence of events had already vanished. Conversely, if the damage was entirely unrelated, detectives had no reliable method to eliminate it as a potential clue. The uncertainty surrounding the porch light became symbolic of the broader investigation. Almost every observation raised questions that could no longer be answered with certainty. An equally significant loss involved the home's answering machine. Before investigators had the opportunity to listen to its contents, a recorded message described by those who heard it as obscene or sexually suggestive was accidentally erased. The available information indicated that the caller was male, but no exact transcript survived. Investigators never had the opportunity to analyze the recording, compare voices, or determine whether the caller possessed any connection to the disappearance. Even decades later, detectives continued acknowledging the answering machine message as one of the most regrettable pieces of lost evidence in the case. Had it been preserved, advances in audio analysis might have offered insights unavailable in 1992. Instead, only secondhand recollections remained, preventing any definitive conclusions regarding its significance. Despite these early setbacks, investigators moved quickly to organize an extensive search. The initial objective was straightforward: determine whether the women remained somewhere nearby and required assistance. Officers searched the surrounding neighborhood, hoping someone had seen unusual activity during the early morning hours. As no immediate explanation emerged, the operation expanded rapidly. Search teams combed wooded areas surrounding Springfield. Officers examined fields, isolated roads, and locations where someone might have abandoned evidence. Trained search dogs were deployed in an effort to detect scents that could lead investigators away. from the house and toward the women's location. Helicopters participated in aerial searches, covering broader sections of terrain than ground teams could efficiently examine. Divers searched bodies of water that might conceal evidence or victims. Wells received careful attention because investigators recognized that secluded locations sometimes become places where offenders attempt to hide victims or physical evidence. Every search reflected the hope that some overlooked location might finally provide the first concrete answer. Yet each operation concluded without locating Cheryl, Susie, or Stacy. As days turned into weeks, investigators shifted from immediate search efforts toward a broader criminal investigation. Detectives began conducting interviews on a massive scale. Friends, relatives, classmates, coworkers, neighbors, and anyone known to have interacted with the women during the days leading up to June 7th were questioned. Particular attention focused on reconstructing the final confirmed timeline. Investigators sought to determine precisely where Susie and Stacy had traveled after graduation, who had attended the celebrations, and whether anyone remembered unusual encounters or suspicious individuals. Witnesses consistently described the evening as normal. There were no verified reports that either young woman appeared frightened or believed someone was following them. No confirmed witness described a confrontation during the graduation parties. This absence of obvious warning signs further complicated efforts to identify a likely suspect. As public awareness of the disappearance grew, tips began arriving from across Missouri and eventually from other parts of the country. Concerned citizens contacted authorities after believing they had seen suspicious vehicles, unfamiliar individuals, or possible sightings of the missing women. Over time, investigators received more than 5,000 tips. Every lead required evaluation. Some involved anonymous callers offering vague information. Others came from individuals convinced they had encountered one of the women after the disappearance. Detectives faced the difficult task of separating potentially valuable information from misunderstandings, rumors, and mistaken identifications. The sheer number of leads demonstrated how deeply the case had affected the public. But quantity did not translate into certainty. One by one, investigative teams followed promising information only to discover that most tips could not be substantiated. Some contradicted established facts. Others simply ended without producing evidence capable of moving the investigation forward. As local resources became increasingly strained by the complexity of the case, the Federal Bureau of Investigation joined the effort. FBI involvement reflected both the unusual nature of the disappearance and the possibility that federal investigative resources might assist where local efforts had reached their limits. Cooperation between agencies expanded the scope of the investigation, allowing additional expertise to be applied to interviews, evidence review, and analytical work. Nevertheless, even with federal assistance, investigators remained confronted by the same fundamental problem that had existed from the beginning: the absence of reliable physical evidence identifying an offender. No confirmed DNA connected a suspect to the crime. No eyewitness reported seeing the three women being forced from the house. No verified confession emerged from anyone with knowledge of what had happened. Detectives repeatedly returned to the residence, reviewing every available detail in the hope that overlooked evidence might reveal itself through fresh examination. Yet the house continued guarding its secrets. Another question quickly became central to the investigation. If the women had indeed been abducted, how had the offender accomplished such an extraordinary act without attracting attention? Three adults disappearing together presented investigators with an unusual logistical problem. In most violent crimes involving multiple victims, at least one person attempts to flee, resist, or create enough noise to alert neighbors. Yet no confirmed reports described screams, gunshots, or sounds of a struggle coming from the East Del Mar residence during the critical hours of the night. This silence strongly influenced investigative thinking. Detectives recognized that whatever occurred likely happened rapidly and under circumstances that prevented meaningful resistance. However, recognizing that possibility did not explain how the offender achieved it. Every investigative theory ultimately had to account for the same puzzling facts. 3 missing women, an apparently undisturbed home, abandoned personal belongings, and an almost complete absence of forensic evidence. The longer the investigation continued, the more detectives understood that they were confronting a case unlike most they had previously encountered. In many criminal investigations, evidence gradually accumulates until a coherent narrative begins to emerge. Here, the opposite often occurred. New information frequently raised additional questions instead of resolving existing ones. Every missing piece of evidence created multiple competing interpretations, none of which could be conclusively proven. The contaminated crime scene limited forensic certainty. The erased answering machine recording eliminated one possible investigative avenue. The broken porch light remained unexplained. The absence of witnesses prevented investigators from reconstructing the final moments inside the house with confidence. Despite enormous effort, countless interviews, extensive searches, and thousands of investigative leads, detectives found themselves facing the same essential mystery that had confronted them on the first day. 3 women had vanished during the night of June 6th and the early morning of June 7th, 1992, and the available evidence explained almost nothing about who had taken them or why. It was at this stage that investigators increasingly turned toward developing and evaluating possible scenarios that could account for every known fact. Those theories would dominate discussions of the case for years to come, shaping both public understanding and the continuing search for the truth behind one of America's most enduring unsolved disappearances. By the time investigators completed the initial searches and processed every piece of physical evidence available to them, one unavoidable reality had emerged. The known facts were remarkably few, yet every one of them demanded an explanation. 3 women had disappeared during a relatively narrow window of time. Their vehicles remained parked outside the residence. Their purses, money, identification keys, clothing, cosmetics, and other personal belongings remained inside the house. Cheryl Levitt's bed showed signs that it had been slept in. There were no obvious signs of forced entry, no confirmed bloodstains, no evidence of a violent struggle, and no eyewitnesses who reported hearing screams or seeing suspicious activity outside the home. Rather than pointing investigators toward a single clear conclusion, these facts created a puzzle in which every possible explanation seemed incomplete. As the investigation continued, detectives began constructing several working theories. None of these represented proven fact. Instead, they were attempts to determine which scenario best accounted for the available evidence while acknowledging the significant gaps that remained. Among all the possibilities considered throughout the years, one theory gradually emerged as the explanation many investigators regarded as the most plausible. It was the hypothesis that the 3 women had been abducted by an armed offender who gained control of the situation quickly and removed them from the house before anyone nearby became aware that a crime was taking place. The reasoning behind this theory began with the striking absence of physical resistance inside the residence. In many violent encounters, investigators expect to find overturned furniture, broken household objects, signs of defensive injuries, or evidence that victims attempted to escape. None of those indicators appeared inside the East Del Mar home. Detectives therefore considered the possibility that whoever confronted the women possessed an overwhelming advantage from the very beginning. If an offender approached the front door carrying a firearm, the dynamics of the encounter would change dramatically. A weapon can eliminate opportunities for resistance before a struggle ever begins. According to this reconstruction, the offender may have knocked on the front door sometime after Susie and Stacy returned home. Because there was no confirmed evidence of forced entry, investigators reasoned that someone inside may have voluntarily opened the door. Whether that person was Cheryl, Susie, or Stacy has never been established. Once the door opened, the theory suggests that the offender immediately displayed a firearm and gained control of the situation before anyone had an opportunity to react. With 3 victims facing an armed individual, even a brief moment of hesitation could allow the offender to issue instructions and maintain control. Under such circumstances, the women may have believed that compliance offered their best chance of survival. Detectives noted that this scenario could explain several otherwise puzzling aspects of the case. If the victims remained cooperative because they believed they would survive, there might be little or no physical struggle inside the residence. The absence of screams reported by neighbors could also be explained if the women feared that resistance would provoke immediate violence. Their belongings remaining inside the house would make sense if they were forced to leave unexpectedly, without time to gather even the most essential personal items. Likewise, the untouched vehicles parked outside would fit a scenario in which the offender transported the women using another vehicle rather than allowing them to drive away themselves. While investigators acknowledged that this reconstruction aligned with many known facts, they also recognized its limitations. No witness reported seeing such an abduction occur. No physical evidence directly established that a firearm had been used. No tire tracks, biological evidence, or recovered weapon confirmed the theory. It remained an investigative model rather than a proven sequence of events. Nevertheless, among the available explanations, many detectives considered it the scenario most consistent with the available evidence. Another theory examined by investigators focused not on the method of the disappearance, but on the identity of the intended target. One possibility suggested that Cheryl Levitt herself had been the person an offender intended to confront. Under this hypothesis, the younger women became victims because they happened to be present in the house at the time. Detectives understood that offenders sometimes eliminate witnesses to reduce the likelihood of identification. If someone arrived intending to harm or abduct Cheryl, discovering Susie and Stacy inside the residence could have dramatically altered the offender's plans. Rather than leaving behind 2 eyewitnesses capable of providing descriptions, the offender might have decided to remove all 3 women. This theory offered one possible explanation for why 3 individuals disappeared simultaneously, instead of only one. However, investigators also acknowledged the weaknesses in this hypothesis. The available evidence did not identify any confirmed dispute, criminal association, or ongoing conflict involving Cheryl that clearly established her as the primary target of a planned attack. While the theory remained possible, it lacked direct evidentiary support. Detectives therefore continued considering it without treating it as a definitive explanation. A separate line of investigation centered upon Suzanne Susie Streeter. During the course of the investigation, detectives learned that Susie had known some individuals who possessed minor criminal records. Importantly, investigators never established that Susie herself engaged in criminal activity or that these acquaintances directly participated in her disappearance. Nonetheless, because investigators are obligated to examine every potentially relevant aspect of a victim's life, they explored whether someone connected to Susie might have targeted her specifically. According to this theory, Cheryl and Stacy could have become unintended victims simply because they were present when the offender arrived. Once again, the reasoning reflected the possibility that an offender would not willingly leave eyewitnesses capable of later identifying him. Yet this theory faced the same fundamental problem encountered throughout the investigation. No evidence directly linked any of Susie's acquaintances to the disappearance. Interviews, investigative leads, and subsequent inquiries failed to establish sufficient evidence connecting any individual within her social circle to the events at East Delmar Street. As a result, investigators could neither confirm nor completely dismiss the possibility. It remained one among several competing explanations. Another observation repeatedly returned investigators to the question of familiarity. The house displayed no confirmed signs of forced entry. Windows had not been broken. Doors did not appear to have been forcibly opened. This naturally led detectives to consider whether the women may have voluntarily opened the front door because they recognized the visitor. In many residential crimes, victims are more likely to unlock a door during the late evening or early morning if they believe the person outside is someone they know or trust. If that occurred here, the offender would have gained immediate access without creating obvious damage to the residents. Some investigators therefore regarded familiarity between the offender and at least one of the victims as a possibility worth serious consideration. At the same time, they emphasized an important distinction. The absence of forced entry does not automatically prove the offender was personally known to the victims. Doors can be opened for many reasons. Someone might respond to an unexpected knock, believing a neighbor needs assistance. A visitor might claim to require help, identify themselves falsely, or exploit ordinary human trust. Consequently, detectives carefully avoided presenting familiarity as an established fact. It remained an inference based upon the available evidence rather than a conclusion supported by direct proof. As investigators evaluated these theories, they repeatedly encountered the same obstacle. Every scenario successfully explained some aspects of the case, while leaving others unresolved. The armed abduction hypothesis accounted for the lack of physical struggle, but could not identify the offender. The theory that Cheryl was the intended target explained why all three women disappeared together, yet lacked evidence demonstrating that anyone specifically sought her. The possibility that Susie had been targeted acknowledged her broader social circle, but investigators uncovered no proof linking those acquaintances to the disappearance. The suggestion that the women knew the offender fit the apparent lack of forced entry. Yet no evidence established exactly who that familiar person might have been. Rather than producing certainty, each theory highlighted how little investigators truly knew about the critical hours between approximately 2:15 a.m., when Susie and Stacy were believed to have arrived home, and the following morning, when friends discovered the empty residence. The inability to reconstruct that period with confidence became the defining characteristic of the case. Unlike many criminal investigations in which forensic evidence gradually narrows the range of possibilities, the Springfield Three remained unusually resistant to definitive explanation. Detectives continued reviewing witness statements, re-examining physical evidence, and comparing every investigative lead against the known facts. But no single theory emerged with sufficient evidentiary support to justify criminal charges. As years passed, attention increasingly shifted toward individuals whose backgrounds or statements warranted closer scrutiny. Several names repeatedly surfaced during the investigation, attracting both public interest and law enforcement attention. Yet even among these persons of interest, investigators would discover that suspicion alone could never replace evidence. The search for someone capable of explaining what happened inside the quiet house on East Delmar Street was far from over. And the next phase of the investigation would focus on the individuals who, for various reasons, came under the scrutiny of detectives determined to solve one of America's most enduring cold cases. As the investigation entered its next phase, detectives faced a challenge common to many long-running cold cases, but particularly severe in the disappearance of the Springfield Three. Physical evidence had provided very little direction. Extensive searches had failed to locate the victims. Thousands of interviews had produced no eyewitness capable of describing exactly what happened during the early morning hours of June 7, 1992. With few forensic leads available, investigators increasingly turned their attention toward individuals whose backgrounds, movements, or statements appeared unusual enough to merit closer examination. It is important, however, to distinguish between a person of interest and a criminal suspect who has been formally charged. Throughout the history of the Springfield Three investigation, law enforcement examined numerous individuals, yet no one has ever been prosecuted for the disappearance of Cheryl Levitt, Suzanne Susie Streeter, and Stacy McCall. Suspicion alone has never been sufficient to overcome the absence of evidence. and investigators have consistently acknowledged that the case remains open because no available proof has established criminal responsibility beyond the standard required for prosecution. Among all the names associated with the investigation, one individual has attracted more sustained attention than any other: Robert Craig Cox. His name has repeatedly surfaced in discussions of the case, not because investigators uncovered definitive forensic evidence connecting him to the disappearance, but because several aspects of his background and later statements raised difficult questions. Cox was a convicted criminal with a history involving kidnapping and armed robbery. Unlike many individuals whose names appeared only briefly during the investigation, he possessed a criminal record that demonstrated a willingness to commit serious violent offenses. Investigators also determined that he had previously lived near Springfield and was believed to have been in the area around the time the three women disappeared. These circumstances alone did not establish guilt, but they ensured that detectives considered him worthy of careful scrutiny. As the years passed, Cox became even more closely associated with the case because of remarks he reportedly made while serving a prison sentence for an unrelated offense. During conversations that later came to the attention of investigators, he claimed that he knew the three women were dead. According to available information, he went even further, reportedly stating that their bodies would never be found. Statements of this nature naturally attracted enormous investigative interest. Detectives are trained to pay close attention whenever an individual appears to possess knowledge concerning an unsolved crime, particularly when that knowledge relates to facts not publicly established. If Cox genuinely knew details unavailable to the public, his statements might have represented an opportunity to solve one of the country's most perplexing disappearances. Investigators therefore examined his claims carefully, attempting to determine whether they reflected genuine inside knowledge or something else entirely. Yet as detectives questioned Cox and evaluated his statements over time, significant problems emerged. Most importantly, he failed to provide information that only the actual offender would reasonably know. His remarks remained general rather than specific. While saying that the women were dead and that their bodies would never be located sounded dramatic, such statements did not identify where the bodies might be found, how the crime had occurred, or who had been responsible. Investigators also concluded that Cox changed portions of his account on different occasions. These inconsistencies weakened the reliability of anything he claimed to know. In criminal investigations, credibility depends not simply upon making provocative statements, but upon providing verifiable information capable of being independently confirmed. Detectives were unable to obtain such confirmation from Cox. As a result, although investigators continued regarding him as an individual deserving attention, they never accumulated sufficient evidence to charge him in connection with the Springfield 3 case. His name remains one of the most frequently discussed in relation to the investigation, yet discussion has never become proof. Another investigative lead involved reports concerning two men who had allegedly been seen digging a grave in an area that attracted attention during the investigation. Rumors of suspicious burial activity inevitably generated concern, particularly in a case where no bodies had ever been recovered. Detectives examined these reports carefully, recognizing that any potential burial site deserved serious consideration. The possibility that someone had prepared or concealed a grave naturally aligned with one of the central mysteries of the case. If the women had been murdered, where had their remains been taken? However, after conducting the appropriate inquiries, investigators were unable to establish a connection between the reported grave-digging activity and the disappearance of the three women. No evidence demonstrated that the individuals involved possessed any relationship with the victims, participated in the events of June 7th, or concealed evidence related to the investigation. Without corroborating facts, the rumors remained only rumors. Consequently, law enforcement did not pursue criminal charges against those individuals in connection with the Springfield 3 investigation. Their appearance in discussions of the case reflects the exhaustive nature of the inquiry rather than proof of involvement. Detectives understood that every unusual report required examination. But responsible investigation also required eliminating leads unsupported by evidence. Another pair of names considered during the investigation belonged to Garrison and Milliken, two local criminals whose histories of violent behavior naturally drew police attention. Whenever investigators confront an unsolved violent crime, individuals already known for serious criminal conduct often receive additional scrutiny. Their prior histories do not establish guilt, but they justify careful investigation, particularly if they operated within the same geographic area. Detectives therefore examined whether either man possessed any connection to Cheryl, Susie, Stacy, or the events surrounding their disappearance. As with other investigative leads, however, the inquiry ultimately encountered the same obstacle that had frustrated detectives throughout the case. Despite examining their backgrounds and considering possible connections, investigators failed to uncover evidence sufficient to support prosecution. Suspicion based upon criminal history alone cannot substitute for physical evidence, reliable witness testimony, or corroborated admissions. Consequently, no charges relating to the Springfield 3 disappearance were ever filed against either individual. Their names gradually became part of the broader history of investigative avenues explored, but not substantiated. One of the defining characteristics of this investigation has been the enormous number of people examined without any resulting prosecution. Over the years, thousands of tips reached investigators. Many suggested possible offenders. Some callers believed they recognized suspicious individuals. Others claimed to possess confidential information or theories explaining the disappearance. Detectives were obligated to examine these reports because even unlikely information occasionally proves valuable in criminal investigations. Yet the overwhelming majority of tips eventually collapsed under closer examination. Some relied upon mistaken identity. Others repeated rumors already circulating within the community. Still others reflected sincere attempts by concerned citizens to help despite lacking firsthand knowledge. The volume of information demonstrated widespread public interest, but it also demanded enormous investigative resources while producing remarkably few confirmed facts. This constant cycle of promising leads followed by disappointment became one of the defining experiences for investigators assigned to the case. Each new name offered hope that the mystery might finally be solved. Each investigation ended with the same conclusion: there was still not enough evidence. As years became decades, detectives repeatedly reviewed earlier investigative decisions, searching for overlooked details that might acquire new significance when viewed alongside later information. Such reviews are common in major cold cases, particularly when advances in forensic science or new witness statements emerge. In the Springfield 3 investigation, however, the fundamental obstacle remained unchanged. Without bodies, without definitive forensic evidence identifying an offender, and without reliable eyewitness testimony describing the disappearance itself, investigators possessed no solid foundation upon which to build a prosecutable case against any individual. Even the persons of greatest investigative interest remained precisely that: individuals worthy of attention rather than defendants facing criminal charges. This distinction has remained critically important throughout the history of the case. Public speculation has often gone far beyond what investigators have been willing to state. Officially, detectives have consistently emphasized that theories, suspicions, and circumstantial observations cannot replace admissible evidence. Every individual discussed during the investigation remains legally uncharged in connection with the disappearance of the 3 women because no available evidence has satisfied the legal standards required for prosecution. That careful approach reflects both the responsibilities of law enforcement and the extraordinary difficulty presented by the case itself. The investigation has never lacked effort. It has lacked proof. More than 3 decades after Cheryl Levitt, Suzanne Streeter, and Stacy McCall vanished, the search for accountability continues not because investigators failed to examine possible offenders, but because every promising lead ultimately stopped short of establishing the truth with certainty. As attention gradually shifted away from individual persons of interest, detectives increasingly confronted a broader question: why had this particular case resisted solution for so many years? Understanding that question required examining not only the people investigated, but also the cumulative effect of every missing piece of evidence, every lost opportunity, and every unanswered question that transformed the Springfield Three into one of the most enduring cold cases in American history. More than 3 decades after the disappearance of Cheryl Levitt, Susan Susie Streeter, and Stacy McCall, investigators continue to confront a question that has become almost as significant as the crime itself. Why has this case remained unsolved despite decades of investigative effort? Many cold cases eventually benefit from a decisive breakthrough. A forgotten witness comes forward. Advances in forensic science reveal new evidence. Or a confession finally provides answers that had remained hidden for years. In the Springfield 3 investigation, however, none of those developments has produced the resolution that families and investigators have long hoped for. Instead, the case has become a textbook example of how multiple investigative obstacles, each significant on its own, can combine to create a mystery that resists even the most determined efforts to solve it. One of the most important factors has been the complete absence of direct eyewitnesses. According to all available information, no one has ever provided a verified account of seeing the 3 women being removed from the residence at 1717 East Delmar Street during the critical hours between approximately 2:15 a.m., when Susie and Stacy are believed to have returned home, and the following morning, when friends arrived to pick them up. The neighborhood itself offered little assistance. No confirmed reports described hearing screams, gunshots, or sounds of a violent struggle. No reliable witness reported observing suspicious vehicles leaving the area. This silence has remained one of the defining characteristics of the investigation. Every reconstruction of the crime must begin by acknowledging that the central event, the disappearance itself, occurred without any confirmed eyewitness capable of describing what actually happened. The absence of modern surveillance technology further complicated the investigation. In 1992, residential security cameras were extremely uncommon. Doorbell cameras, digital video recorders, and mobile phones capable of documenting events did not exist in the form they do today. As a result, investigators possessed no video evidence showing who approached the residence, whether anyone entered or exited the home, or whether an unfamiliar vehicle stopped outside during the night. Modern investigators solving crimes often rely heavily upon electronic records that automatically preserve timelines of movement and communication. None of those resources were available in Springfield during the summer of 1992. Consequently, detectives were forced to depend almost entirely upon physical evidence and witness recollections, both of which proved frustratingly limited. Another major obstacle emerged before investigators even began processing the scene. By the time law enforcement recognized that the residence might be the location of a serious crime, numerous friends, relatives, and concerned individuals had already entered the house. Their intentions were entirely understandable. They believed they were searching for missing loved ones, not walking through an active crime scene. Nevertheless, every person who entered the residence unintentionally altered the environment investigators would later examine. Fingerprints became mixed together, shoe impressions overlapped, hair fibers, and countless microscopic traces from innocent visitors complicated later forensic analysis. According to estimates made during the investigation, somewhere between 10 and 20 people entered the house before officers secured it. Under modern investigative standards, preserving a crime scene from contamination is considered one of the most critical responsibilities during the earliest stages of an investigation. In the Springfield 3 case, that opportunity had already passed before detectives fully understood what they were facing. The loss of the answering machine recording represented another painful setback. According to those who heard it, the message was left by a male caller whose comments were sexually explicit or otherwise disturbing. Yet before investigators could listen to the recording themselves, it was accidentally erased. Detectives have repeatedly acknowledged that this lost message may have represented one of the most significant pieces of evidence in the entire investigation. Had it been preserved, investigators might have compared the voice against persons of interest, examined speech characteristics, or applied forensic audio techniques developed in later years. Instead, only general descriptions survived, leaving investigators unable to determine whether the caller possessed any connection to the disappearance at all. The broken glass from the porch light created a similar problem. Once it had been swept away before police arrived, investigators lost the opportunity to examine it for fingerprints, blood, fibers, or other trace evidence. Even today, detectives cannot determine whether the damaged light fixture played any role in the disappearance or merely represented an unrelated accident. Every lost piece of evidence narrowed the investigative options available during the critical first days of the case. Perhaps the single greatest challenge confronting investigators has been the complete absence of the victims themselves. No bodies have ever been recovered. Without remains, investigators cannot establish a confirmed cause of death, determine the exact time of death, identify injuries that might reveal the method of the crime, or recover forensic evidence that could identify an offender. In homicide investigations, the victim's body often provides crucial information regarding how the crime occurred. Here, investigators have been forced to proceed without that essential source of evidence. The lack of recovered remains has also complicated legal proceedings. Although investigators strongly suspect that the women did not leave voluntarily and believe they are deceased, the absence of physical evidence makes it significantly more difficult to prove criminal responsibility beyond a reasonable doubt against any specific individual. Another reason the case remains unresolved is that every major investigative theory contains unanswered questions. The hypothesis that an armed offender entered the residence and quickly gained control explains why no obvious struggle occurred. But it does not identify who that offender was or how he escaped detection. The possibility that Cheryl was the intended target explains why all three women disappeared together if the offender sought to eliminate witnesses. Yet no evidence confirms that anyone specifically targeted her. The theory that Susie may have been the intended victim because of her social acquaintances similarly lacks direct evidence connecting those relationships to the crime. The suggestion that the offender was known to the victims because there was no confirmed forced entry remains plausible but unproven. Investigators have repeatedly emphasized that these theories exist because they help organize available evidence, not because any one of them has been established as historical fact. The case remains open precisely because no theory has yet been supported by sufficient evidence to become a prosecutable conclusion. Over the years, law enforcement agencies have continued encouraging members of the public to come forward with new information. The Springfield Police Department has never officially closed the investigation, and the Federal Bureau of Investigation has likewise continued recognizing the disappearance as an active case. Detectives understand that some of the most important breakthroughs in cold cases occur decades after the original crime. Memories change, relationships change. Individuals who once remained silent sometimes decide to speak. Advances in forensic science occasionally permit investigators to re-examine evidence previously considered uninformative, although no such breakthrough has yet solved the Springfield 3 mystery. Investigators continue believing that new information could eventually emerge. That hope remains one of the reasons the investigation has never been abandoned. In 2007, renewed public attention focused on a rumor suggesting that the victim's remains might be buried beneath a parking garage associated with a former hospital. The speculation arose after ground-penetrating radar reportedly detected anomalies beneath the concrete surface. Understandably, the possibility generated significant public interest. If the rumor proved accurate, Investigators might finally recover the physical evidence that had remained missing since 1992. Yet despite the radar findings, the area was never fully excavated. The location had been covered with concrete for many years, and investigators concluded that the available information did not constitute sufficient evidence to justify a comprehensive excavation. Consequently, the reported anomalies remain exactly that: unexplained irregularities rather than confirmed evidence connected to the Springfield 3 investigation. The episode illustrates another recurring feature of the case. Time and again, developments have appeared promising before ultimately failing to provide definitive answers. Throughout its history, the investigation has been marked by possibilities rather than certainties. The Springfield 3 has therefore become more than an unsolved disappearance. It has become a case study demonstrating how the absence of evidence can be every bit as powerful as evidence itself. Every missing witness, every lost forensic opportunity, every contaminated surface, every erased recording, and every unanswered question has contributed to a mystery that continues to challenge investigators more than 30 years after the women vanished. There has been no arrest, no trial, and no courtroom where evidence could be presented before a jury. The chapter that would ordinarily describe prosecution and verdict remains unwritten because the investigation has never reached that stage. Instead, the legal status of the case remains unchanged. It is an active cold case, still awaiting the discovery of evidence capable of transforming decades of unanswered questions into established facts. Until that day arrives, the disappearance of Cheryl Levitt, Suzanne Streeter, and Stacy McCall remains one of the most baffling unsolved mysteries in the history of the United States, reminding investigators and the public alike that some crimes continue echoing through generations not because they were witnessed by millions, but because no one has ever been able to explain exactly how they happened. The disappearance of Cheryl Levitt, Susie Streeter, and Stacy McCall has remained one of the most unsettling mysteries in American criminal history, not only because 3 people vanished at the same time, but because the circumstances surrounding that disappearance have never produced a clear answer. In many missing person cases, investigators eventually uncover a timeline, identify a suspect, locate evidence, or recover the missing individuals. The Springfield 3 investigation has followed a very different path. More than 3 decades later, the case remains defined by unanswered questions, incomplete explanations, and the continuing search for facts. Yet behind the theories, investigative reports, and public speculation are 3 families who have lived with uncertainty for decades, never receiving the answers needed to understand what happened to their loved ones. The human impact of this case extends far beyond the police investigation. For the families of Cheryl, Susie, and Stacy, June 7, 1992, was not simply the beginning of an investigation. It was the beginning of a lifelong wait for information. Every anniversary, every new tip, and every reported discovery brought the possibility of answers, but also the possibility of disappointment. Unlike families who receive confirmation of what happened, even when the truth is painful, the families connected to the Springfield 3 have been forced to live without certainty. They have never known exactly where the women went, who was responsible, or why they were taken. The absence of those answers has created a unique form of suffering, one built not only on loss but also on uncertainty. Cheryl Levitt was 47 years old when she disappeared. She was a mother, a hairdresser, and a woman whose daily life centered around her work and her family. Her disappearance left behind a daughter who was never seen again and a community struggling to understand how someone could vanish from a peaceful residential home without leaving behind a clear explanation. Friends and acquaintances remembered Cheryl as someone who worked hard and cared deeply about those close to her. Nothing in the known investigation suggested that she was involved in dangerous activities or living a life that would explain such a sudden disappearance. For those who knew her, The mystery was made even more difficult by the fact that there was no obvious reason why anyone would want to harm her. Suzanne Streeter disappeared at 19 years old, just after reaching one of the most important transitions of young adulthood. She had graduated from high school only hours before she vanished. The celebrations of that night represented a moment that should have marked new beginnings, future plans, and opportunities. Instead, her graduation became the final known chapter of her life. Friends remembered Susie as outgoing and social, someone with many friendships and an active social life. She was a young woman preparing to move forward, yet all of those plans ended without explanation. While investigators examined aspects of her social connections, including the fact that she had known some individuals with minor criminal records, no evidence ever established that these relationships played a role in her disappearance. Stacy McCall was only 18 years old. Like Susie, she had just graduated from high school. She was described by her family as responsible and close to those around her. Her disappearance was especially difficult for those who knew her because there was no indication that she planned to leave or separate herself from her family. According to available information, Stacy was someone who maintained strong connections with those close to her and generally communicated her plans. Her sudden disappearance, therefore, appeared completely inconsistent with her known behavior. As the years passed, the mystery surrounding the three women continued to attract national attention. The case became widely recognized as one of America's most famous unsolved disappearances. Public interest grew through media coverage, documentaries, and discussions among people fascinated by unresolved criminal cases. However, for investigators and the families involved, the case was not a mystery to be studied from a distance. It was an ongoing search for three real people whose lives had been interrupted. This distinction has remained important. The women are remembered not only because of the circumstances surrounding their disappearance, but because of who they were before that night. The continued attention surrounding the case has also created challenges. In highly publicized investigations, speculation often grows alongside legitimate information. Over the years, numerous theories have emerged regarding what might have happened inside the East Del Mar home. Some theories have focused on possible offenders, others on possible locations where evidence might be found. Investigators have examined many of these possibilities, but they have repeatedly emphasized the difference between a theory and a fact. Without physical evidence, confirmed witnesses, or reliable information directly connecting an individual to the crime, no theory has reached the level required for prosecution. This careful distinction has been essential in protecting the integrity of the investigation. The case has also demonstrated how advances in technology can change the way investigators approach older crimes. In 1992, investigators did not have access to many forensic tools that exist today. Digital records, advanced DNA analysis, and widespread surveillance systems have transformed modern criminal investigations. Evidence that once seemed impossible to interpret can sometimes reveal new information decades later. Although the Springfield 3 case has not yet benefited from a breakthrough of that kind, investigators continue to believe that new technology or newly discovered information could eventually provide answers. The possibility of a future breakthrough remains one of the reasons the investigation has never been abandoned. The role of the public has also remained significant. Thousands of tips have been submitted over the years, demonstrating that the disappearance continues to affect people far beyond Springfield. Some individuals have contacted authorities because they believed they possessed information. Others have simply kept the case alive by continuing to discuss the women and the unanswered questions surrounding their disappearance. In many cold cases, public awareness plays an important role because memories can change over time and individuals who previously remained silent may eventually decide to speak. Investigators have continued asking anyone with relevant information to come forward, recognizing that even a small detail could potentially change the direction of the investigation. Despite decades of uncertainty, law enforcement has never officially declared the case solved or abandoned. The Springfield Police Department continues to treat the disappearance as an open investigation, and federal authorities have also remained involved. The continued classification of the case as active reflects a belief that answers may still exist. Investigators have not identified a confirmed offender, but they have also not concluded that the truth is unreachable. Many cold cases have been solved years or even decades after the original crime, often because a single piece of new information finally connected previously separate details. For the families of Cheryl, Susie, and Stacy, that possibility represents the hope that has carried them through the years. The legacy of the Springfield Three is therefore not only one of mystery, but also of remembrance. The case continues to remind the public that behind every unsolved investigation are individuals whose lives mattered before they became part of a criminal file. Cheryl was a mother and a working woman. Susie was a teenager beginning adulthood. Stacy was a recent graduate with a future ahead of her. Their identities are not defined only by the circumstances of their disappearance. They are remembered as people whose lives, relationships, and dreams existed before that tragic morning. The unanswered questions surrounding June 7th, 1992, continue to haunt investigators because the facts seem almost impossible to reconcile. 3 women entered a home in the early hours of the morning. By daylight, they were gone. Their possessions remained. Their vehicles remained. Their dog remained. Yet they did not. The absence of a clear explanation has allowed the case to remain unresolved for more than 30 years. But the passage of time has not erased the importance of finding answers. For the families, for investigators, and for everyone who continues to remember the case, the search is not simply about solving a mystery. It is about finally providing the truth that Cheryl Levitt, Suzanne Streeter, and Stacy McCall deserve. Until that truth is discovered, the Springfield Three will remain an open wound in American criminal history, a reminder of the lives lost, the questions unanswered, and the enduring hope that someday the silence will finally be broken. The investigation into the disappearance of Cheryl Levitt, Suzanne Susie Streeter, and Stacy McCall has continued for more than 3 decades because, despite the passage of time, one fact has never changed: the case remains open. There has been no final explanation for what occurred inside the house at 1717 East Delmar Street during the early morning hours of June 7, 1992. There has been no courtroom presentation of evidence, no trial, and no verdict. Instead, the investigation has remained suspended between what authorities believe happened and what they can legally prove. The distinction between those two realities is at the heart of why the Springfield Three case remains unresolved. Investigators have consistently believed that the women did not simply leave voluntarily. The circumstances surrounding their disappearance strongly suggest that something happened to them, inside or immediately connected to the residence. Yet belief, even when based on years of investigation, cannot replace the physical evidence required to bring a case before a court. Without that evidence, prosecutors have never been able to move forward with criminal charges against any individual. The legal chapter of the Springfield Three case, therefore, remains unfinished. Unlike many major criminal investigations that eventually progress through arrest, trial, and sentencing, this case has remained in the investigative stage. There has been no defendant standing before a judge. No jury has ever heard testimony about what happened that night. No evidence has been presented in court to establish responsibility for the disappearance. The absence of a trial does not mean the case has been forgotten. Instead, it reflects the continuing challenge faced by investigators. They know that 3 women disappeared, but they have never obtained enough evidence to prove exactly who was responsible. Throughout the years, law enforcement agencies have continued reviewing information, following leads, and evaluating new possibilities. The Springfield Police Department has maintained the investigation as an active cold case. The Federal Bureau of Investigation has also remained involved due to the unusual circumstances surrounding the disappearance. The continued involvement of investigators demonstrates that the case has never been considered closed. Authorities continue to believe that someone possesses information capable of explaining what happened. The question has never been whether the women deserve answers. The question has always been where those answers can be found. One of the most difficult aspects of the investigation has been the absence of a confirmed location connected to the disappearance. Despite extensive searches over the years, the remains of Cheryl, Susie, and Stacy have never been found. This fact has affected nearly every aspect of the investigation. Without recovered remains, investigators have been unable to determine the cause of death, establish a precise timeline after the disappearance, or obtain potential forensic evidence that might identify an offender. In many criminal investigations, the discovery of victims provides a turning point. It allows investigators to understand what happened and directs attention towards specific evidence. In the Springfield 3 case, that turning point never arrived. Every search effort carried the hope that it might finally provide answers. Search teams examined areas considered potentially significant. Investigators followed reports, reviewed information from the public, and examined locations suggested by various leads. One of the most notable searches occurred in 2007, when attention focused on a possible location beneath a parking garage associated with a former hospital. Ground-penetrating radar reportedly identified unusual areas beneath the concrete surface, leading to speculation that evidence connected to the disappearance might exist there. The possibility attracted significant attention because finding the victims would represent a major breakthrough after many years of uncertainty. However, investigators determined that the available information did not provide sufficient justification for a complete excavation. The area had been covered with concrete for years, making further investigation difficult, and the anomalies detected by radar could not be confirmed as evidence related to the case. As a result, the search ended without providing answers. The incident demonstrated one of the recurring patterns throughout the investigation. A possibility would emerge, hope would increase, and then the available evidence would prove insufficient to establish the truth. This cycle has repeated many times. New information has periodically revived attention toward the case, but no development has produced the breakthrough required to identify an offender or locate the missing women. For investigators, these moments represent both opportunity and frustration. A single credible detail could potentially transform the investigation, but separating meaningful information from speculation remains one of the greatest challenges in a case that has generated enormous public interest. The passage of time has also created new difficulties. Memories fade. Witnesses age. People move away. Some individuals connected to the original investigation may no longer be available to provide additional information. At the same time, time itself can sometimes become an advantage. Individuals who once refused to speak may eventually decide to come forward. Relationships change. Personal circumstances change. Someone who remained silent for decades may eventually choose to provide information that could not be obtained earlier. This possibility has kept investigators and families hopeful that the case can still be solved. Advances in forensic science also represent another potential path forward. When the investigation began in 1992, DNA technology and forensic methods were far less advanced than they are today. Evidence that may have seemed impossible to analyze in the past can sometimes provide new information when examined using modern techniques. Investigators have continued considering whether any remaining evidence from the original investigation could produce new findings through updated analysis. Although no confirmed forensic breakthrough has occurred, the possibility remains one of the strongest reasons cold cases continue to be investigated decades after the original crime. The Springfield 3 investigation also highlights the importance of public cooperation. More than 5,000 tips have been submitted over the years, reflecting the continuing interest and concern surrounding the case. Some information has helped investigators examine possible leads, while other tips have ultimately proven unreliable. However, law enforcement has always recognized that even seemingly minor information can become significant when combined with other evidence. Many solved cold cases have been resolved because someone finally provided a detail that investigators did not previously possess. For this reason, authorities have continued asking the public to share information rather than assume that a small observation is unimportant. Despite the attention surrounding the case, investigators have remained careful not to accuse individuals without evidence. Several people have been discussed publicly as possible suspects or persons of interest, including Robert Craig Cox, but no one has ever been charged in connection with the disappearance. This distinction is essential. The fact that an individual attracts investigative attention does not mean that person is responsible. Law enforcement must separate suspicion from proof. And throughout the history of the Springfield 3 investigation, no person has been connected to the crime strongly enough to face prosecution. This careful approach has protected the integrity of the investigation while also acknowledging the uncertainty that continues to surround the case. More than 30 years later, the disappearance of Cheryl Levitt, Suzanne Streeter, and Stacy McCall remains one of the most unusual unsolved cases in the United States. It is unusual not because there was a lack of investigation, but because so much investigation has produced so little certainty. Thousands of leads have been reviewed. Numerous individuals have been questioned. Extensive searches have been conducted. Yet the central questions remain unanswered. Who entered or approached the home? How were 3 people removed without leaving clear evidence behind? Where are they now? And why has no one been held accountable? These questions continue to define the investigation. The Springfield 3 case has endured because it represents the kind of mystery that challenges the basic assumptions investigators often rely upon. A home usually provides evidence. A neighborhood usually provides witnesses. Personal belongings usually provide clues. Yet in this case, the home provided very few answers. The neighborhood provided no confirmed eyewitnesses, and the belongings left behind only deepened the mystery. The investigation has reached a point where solving the case may depend on something entirely new. A forgotten piece of information, a person deciding to speak, or evidence that can finally be understood through modern technology. Until then, the disappearance remains an open question. The women who vanished that night continue to be remembered, not only as victims of an unsolved crime, but as individuals whose lives mattered. Cheryl Levitt, Suzanne Streeter, and Stacy McCall were more than names in an investigation file. They were family members, friends, and members of a community that still hopes for answers. The passage of time has not erased the importance of their story. Instead, it has reinforced the need to continue searching for the truth. The final chapter of the Springfield 3 has not yet been written. For the families, for investigators, and for everyone who continues to seek answers, the hope remains that one day the silence surrounding June 7, 1992, will finally be replaced by the truth.